Welcome to this SESAR webinar on the master plan. I understood that it's our 8th webinar and the first in a series that will be focusing on digitalization over the next days and weeks. My name is Alain Sibert. I'm the Chief Economist and Master Planning at the SESAR Joint Undertaking. And I will have the pleasure to be your host today to discuss the exciting challenge of digitalization in a very difficult context with the COVID crisis that is hitting our sector particularly hard. To discuss this important issue, I have the pleasure first to welcome my colleague and boss, Florian Guillermet, who is the Executive Director of the SESAR Joint Undertaking. Hi, Florian. Thank you for joining us. I also have the pleasure of having with me Hortensia Caballero, who is a colleague at the SESAR Joint Undertaking, an expert on master planning. Hello and welcome, Hortensia. And Marie-France Deslandes from Eurocontrol, who is our coordinator for master planning activities and dealing with this project in the SESAR program. Welcome, Marie-France.
Welcome, everyone.
Before starting the session, I would like to introduce you to some practical instructions to make sure that this is an enjoyable session for all. So for your information, this session is going to be recorded. All material is going to be made available on the SESAR Joint Undertaking website. On your screen to the right, you will see a chat section. So this is the area where we really encourage you not to be shy and to exchange amongst yourselves. If you would like to raise some questions to the speakers, please use the questions tab. We will do our utmost to answer to most of them, as many as we can, later during the Q&A session. And because we want this session to be very interactive, we have prepared some polls for you to answer, so please contribute to that, and we will be sharing results as we progress through the presentation. So let's start with one immediately. So I hope that it's appearing on your screen to the right on the poll. What do you expect to get out of this webinar? Is it to get a better understanding of shorter term implications of the updated master plan? So shorter term for us means more the period 2020 to 2025. Or is it to get a better understanding of the medium to longer term implications, if you want, for the new normal post-COVID, and in which direction we are going to accelerate the digital transformation of our sector? Or is it, last question, to get a better general understanding of changes ahead and seeing the future for aviation infrastructure in Europe? So please answer to that. I will be coming back to the results a little bit later, but without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Florian for a high-level perspective on the vision for the future. Florian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alain, and good afternoon, everyone. The idea of me taking the floor in this session is just in a few minutes to set the scene a bit on where we stand with the master plan in the very special circumstances that we all face in aviation. As you know, just a couple of weeks actually after the formal adoption of this new edition of the master plan, setting up a vision for the next 10, 15 years in our sector, the aviation got struck by this very, very significant crisis that we still are in today. And obviously, this led to a significant number of questions, of conversations that we actually had with our members, with our stakeholders, that you surely have with your colleagues, with as well your respective community. And the first question is really, is this vision that we have established for the future of the air traffic management domain and basically for the operating environment of aviation valid? In that context, if assuming it remains valid, is the path that is described in the master plan the correct one? do we have identified the right priorities, or do we have to make any kind of adjustments in the short, medium term compared to what we had foreseen, in particular in terms of traffic increase, growth, but as well key challenges. We all know that obviously the picture has changed quite a lot in our domain in terms of traffic perspective and so on, even though the current forecasts do foresee a pickup of the traffic in the years to come. We know that there is a significant different perspective than the one we had when this master plan was established. So it's really about understanding the implication, and I hope this session will actually help you and as well convince you that yes, there are implications, but on the other hand, the overall vision that was established in the master plan remains to a large extent the valid one. Just to go into a bit more detail on that, I think the key elements I wanted to highlight in this introduction are related to what we can expect in terms of key attributes for the future air traffic management system. The first one to highlight probably is in relation to the overall ability of the system to cope with the traffic, to cope with the demand. While obviously we were talking a lot in the previous years, 2018, 19, about the capacity and the capacity situation we were facing and the focus, the need to inject more capacity into the system, there is a clear new world that is coming in, and we now talk much more about scalability and the ability actually of the system to adapt to up and downs. And today, this is really what we do see emerging as one of the critical aspects of the future system, as the biggest probably challenge we have to adjust in the system. The second one is related to the overall cost of the system and the cost in relation to the efficiency of the overall traffic management. And there as well, we believe that elements in the vision, elements in the technical content that has been established through the master plan remain fully valid and actually probably have to be accelerated if we look at the prospect ahead of us. This is about improving the productivity of the human, of the capital, but as well in doing it in a way which is of course compatible with what ATM is about, with the safety-related aspect, with as well making sure that the human beings, the human actors of the system remain fully in the loop of what's going on. A third attribute is definitely related to the environmental aspects, and there I think we do really have a clear opportunity ahead of us to make sure that the way the aircraft are actually flying in the skies today become or really remain, I would say, the new norm in the future system when the traffic is progressively coming back. We have here an opportunity really to rebuild with the technical component of SESAR, a system whereby we constantly optimize the trajectory of the flight and therefore minimize the impact on the environment. The other element is probably related to the resilience of the system. We do still have today a system that, despite all the efforts that are being made to make it very robust, does remain fragile because of its construct, because of the way airspace is being managed across Europe. And there again, we do have solutions that can really improve the situation in making the way we manage the traffic much more resilient to big events like airspace closure or to capacity disruption. And finally, the last point I wanted to highlight, which I think is maybe something that comes very high on the agenda with this crisis, is the predictability aspect. With all the sanitary measures that are going to be put onto the system at the airport, the constraints that were not there before that will have to be applied by airspace users, it is very clear that if we want to keep a good passenger experience, an overall proper control over this journey, we have to make it very reliable. We cannot afford to have passengers that are getting stuck at the airport in any part of the journey. which will jeopardize basically all the other measures that are being put in place. So what I'm trying to say here is we have a vision that has been established in the master plan. We believe, and this will be for us convince you today, that this vision remains to a very large extent valid. It is a vision of bringing the ATM infrastructure into the digital age, what we have called the digital European sky. And of course, yes, we do have to revisit how we will get there, what will be the priorities and the timeline, but definitely we believe it still has to go into this direction and probably to be accelerated. That's maybe the first message I wanted to pass as part of this introduction. The second one, I think, is maybe a collective responsibility as well that we all have, which goes well beyond what we do in the SESAR or through the master plan. It is our ability to prepare our future, to continue to invest in the development and in the modernization of our aviation system, of our operating environment. And I think we have there a very concrete proposal to make as part of this new edition of the master plan. Thank you, and I will be ready to take on some questions later on. Thank you. Over to you, Alain.
Before I provide you with an overview, not so much on content, but more what the master plan is about and why we have one, I would just like to reflect a little bit on the answers to the first poll that you kindly, by large, answered to. And it's very interesting, the result. I mean, I think actually we have anticipated this to some extent, so I hope that you will be pleased with the presentations that will be coming later. But about half of you are here to get a better general understanding of where we are heading in the future, whilst the remaining part is somehow split between a focus on where are we heading for the very short term, so more the 2020 to 2025 trajectory towards the vision, whilst some others are more interested in the medium to long term. So by large, I think that we can say that the interest today is on the whole journey, on the vision and how we get there. About the plan, we like to say that the master plan is much more than just a paper exercise. As you know, here in Brussels, there is a lot of paper exercise being produced. Why is it any different for the master plan? Well, if it is not in the master plan, essentially it is not in SESAR, and therefore also from a technology contribution, it is not in the single European sky. It develops why we need to act, the key priority in terms of what needs to be done, and gives indications that are aspirational with regards to due dates for the implementation of those priorities. Why is it so important? Well, because public investment has played an important role in the rollout of the SESAR project, but also and mostly the investments of private stakeholders. And it is important to have a handshake, if you want, between the policymakers and the investors in the system, the actors in the systems, to make sure that we are all very aligned with regards to those priorities and are able to accommodate changes in the context in which we operate. Last, it's also the glue, if you want, between development activities that are active since the launch of the first SESAR research and development program with the deployment activities that have been active since the implementation of the pilot common project regulation. So it's about keeping these things together with a clear deployment orientation. The master plan is also an important document because for the first time this one is putting the plan for modernization of ATM infrastructure that we have in SESAR directly in connection with the European plan for aviation safety and the safety dimension that is maintained by EASA. So because now we have a strong link between those two plans, I think we have a chance to have a much more aligned action between the SESAR activities and the EASA priorities on ATM safety. Just to mention one, because we have seen that quite a few of you are coming from an authorities background, we also hope that through that it will increase greatly the readability for regulators and authorities out there with regards to future rulemaking on ATM. Another dimension that we wanted to emphasize, and obviously, as you can imagine, we could emphasize many dimensions of this plan, is a global dimension. This plan is not developed in isolation. It is developed in the context of the global air navigation planning cycles. And in many ways, the master plan is playing the role of an ambassador of the European voice in the global scene. It has contributed by large to help shape the global air navigation plan. For those of you that have looked at the most recent update, that really for the first time, I would say, grasps the potential of digitalization for our sector, and is also the basis of reporting of our region back to the global ICAO context, in particular through the reporting efforts that Eurocontrol is coordinating. A last dimension that I would like to emphasize, which to me is probably the most important one, is that the plan is only as good as the consensus it is able to generate. And all actors have been involved in this update. It is not, in a way, a plan that is just a dream plan. It is a result of lots of discussions, compromising, stretching the ambition level. It is the most realistic plan we have right now for modernization in our sector. And I would like to thank all stakeholders that have been actively engaged in this update and in these discussions, whether it is the operational stakeholder community with service providers, airspace users, but also the technology providers, the authorities, regulators, the scientific community, the professional staff associations, standards making bodies, intergovernmental organizations, and in particular Eurocontrol that is helping us coordinate these activities. As I said, the strength of this plan resides in the ability to share a vision. So we hope that this is now a good transition for me to hand over to my colleague Hortensia to introduce you to the updated SESAR vision towards the digital European sky. Over to you, Hortensia.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. In this presentation, what we are going to learn is the strategy and priorities needed to bring the European ATM infrastructure into the digital age. Let's begin going a bit deeper into the ATM Master Plan. You can see in this slide what will the future of aviation infrastructure look like. In other words, the SESAR vision. As you can see in the picture of your right, the current ATM infrastructure will evolve gradually from, for example, fixed routes, low level of information sharing, fixed national airspace structures, limited automation, poor scalability, to a dynamic airspace configuration and management, free routes, automation support, and, for example, a high resilient network. It would follow a holistic approach rather than being focused on portion of airspace. The vision is going to deliver a fully scalable traffic management system, capable of operating seamlessly and safely in all environments and classes of airspace. It will adapt quickly and flexibly to traffic demand, considering manned or unmanned traffic. The system infrastructure will become more modular and agile, relying on data sharing and open to the sector. So what is important in this slide is that the future ATM architecture will progressively evolve into a fully scalable ATC system with a strong air-ground integration, relying on digital ecosystem, elimination of environmental inefficiency caused by the aviation infrastructure, and capable of fully exploiting the potential offered by the next generation aircraft for cleaner and quieter flights. Okay, now, how close are we to this vision? The vision is being realized in 4 progressive but overlapping phases. This slide shows those 4 phases, from phase A to phase D. Let us start with phase A. Phase A addresses known critical network performance deficiencies. We could find solutions that enhance collaboration between stakeholders, implementing initial system-wide information management, initial SWIM, and introducing network capacity and demand balancing measures. The second is phase B. Phase B is focused on efficient services and infrastructure delivery. This phase contains the launch of the first ATM data services, the introduction of cross-border free route operations, the integration of advanced airport performance management into the network, and the provision of initial airspace services. The third, phase C, tackles the fragmentation of European skies through virtualization and dynamic airspace configuration by the gradual introduction of high levels of automation support, the full integration of airports into ATM at network level, and the management of routine drones operation. And finally, the fourth phase, D, the digital European sky. This phase will deliver of a fully scalable system for unmanned and unmanned aviation supported by a digital ecosystem, full air-ground system integration, distributed data services, and high levels of automation and connectivity. So please remember that the vision is being realized in 4 progressive but overlapping phases. Phase A addresses the non-critical network performance deficiencies. B, focused on efficient services and infrastructure delivery. C, tackles the fragmentation of European sky through virtualization. And phase D, the implementation of digital European sky. We have been speaking about the introduction of automation support in the vision phases. You can see here a zoom in the automation support dimension. It is an example of an automation model for ATC, where it represents very gradual steps to get to higher levels of automation support. The goal is optimizing the overall performance of the interface human-machine and maximizing human performance at all times. So the key message here is that very gradual steps will be followed to get high levels of automation support. Delivering the vision will require changes in the way that technologies are developed and deployed, as well as in the way services are provided and operational procedures are followed. And it could not be possible to disconnect one from others. This change in approach builds on the recommendation made in the proposal for the architecture of European airspace and its transition plan. Therefore, this time was considered developments in airspace, operations, and technical in combination with changes to service provision and regulation needed. In this new edition of ATM Master Plan, it can be found that the airspace, operation, and technological developments are integrated. All are integrated in one plan. Our goal, as you may know, is to deliver the vision. So to get to that target, it was created the essential operational change concept. These 9 essential operational changes are game changers, triggering a structural evolution of the European ATM. They will deliver the SESAR vision up to phase C, including phase C. These 9 EOCs are not independent of each other. In particular, some of them are closely linked. For example, fully dynamic and optimized airspace or trajectory-based operations deliver en route performance. In addition, each EOC is supported by a number of SESAR solutions and deployment scenarios that are mature or approaching mature to be deployed. The important thing that you should remind of this slide is that to deliver the vision, there are 9 game changers supported by mature or approaching mature solutions ready for deployment. As we could show in the previous slide, airspace is one of these essential operational changes. The demand for drone services is increasing. Everyone knows that there is a huge pressure from the industry. airspace will enable complex drone operations with a high degree of automation to take place in all types of operational environments, including urban areas. airspace is a set of services that goes from number 1, foundation services, to number 4, the full integration of drones. Currently, airspace services is ready for deployment. The main objective of this service number 1 is to identify drones and operators and to inform them about non-restricted areas. Just a recommendation for those beginners in the concept of airspace, please check the SESAR website and look for the airspace webinars. Going back to what I have explained, you could identify that I mentioned solutions, technology, procedures, even I mentioned incremented the levels of automation support. But the ATM system cannot work without the human role. Human is a key element of the system in ATM, and indeed in ATM Master Plan. Considering the future scenario of scalability and resilience, we should ensure that all traffic is handled safely and efficiently during all circumstances. So, the role of the human and human-machine interface will be critical. Then, how would human system integration in the ATM system be supported? By a number of essential changes as a new work system, new tools, decision-making tools, human and machine working together, systems thinking design approach, and appropriate change management process. I would like to emphasize that human dimension is a critical element of the ATM system. The current crisis requires further innovation efforts to accelerate the digitalization of the aviation infrastructure to offer new capabilities. Take a look at this slide. Here you have the R&D priorities areas identified. The first one, connected and automated ATM. Highly automated systems with numerous actors will interact with each other seamlessly, making the system scalable and even safer than today. Air-ground integration and autonomy. A closer integration between vehicle and infrastructure capability is key. The another one is airspace and urban air mobility. The safe and secure integration of drones in the airspace, especially in urban areas. The following one, virtualization and cybersecurity secure data sharing. Service provision will be decoupled from the physical infrastructure, enabling air traffic and data service providers to plug in their operations where needed in a secure manner. Capacity on demand and dynamic airspace. Dynamic reconfiguration and the activation of cross-border capacity on demand services is key to maintain smooth traffic services at busy times. Artificial intelligence for aviation. Thanks to the application of machine learning, deep learning, and big data analytics, we will be able to design an ATM system that is smarter and safer. And last but not least, civil-military interoperability and coordination. This will allow real-time exchange trajectory information, will improve the predictability of military operations, and overall network capacity. These 7 areas correspond to phase D of the master plan visions, if you remember, and with the delivery of the digital European sky. The key message is that further innovation efforts are needed to accelerate the digitalization of aviation infrastructure. Currently, it's being further developed for the preparation of SESAR 3. So, thank you for your attention. I hope you have learned more about the SESAR vision and the key priorities to bring the European ATM infrastructure into the digital age. Now I pass the floor to my colleague Marie-France Delon.
Thank you, Hortensia. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to continue and present on the master plan. We effectively, in the master plan, we link research and development with deployment. The master plan is not just about research and innovation, it connects also to the reality. And so what you see on this slide is that a good part of the solutions which are researched by the program have effectively evolved into a deployment status in recent years. And this deployment is undergoing in accordance to local decisions when it is about non-regulated solutions, but as well, this deployment decision may be taken collectively when we know that there is a need to have a synchronized deployment at the network level. And this is typically what happens when we have a regulated deployment of solutions.
Marie-France, it's Alain speaking, so, if you can hear me.
Oui.
We are just...
Yes. You don't hear me?
No, we can hear you clearly, but I could not see the display of your slides. If you could just check that.
Okay, I'm just checking that. Yes, I have forgotten one step, I think. Application window. Slideshow. Share. Should get better. Sorry, so this was the slide. Do you see it now? Alain? Or not? Can someone explain or share that it's now on screen?
If you can hear me, Marie-France, I can see it on the screen.
Thank you very much, Alain. Okay, so this is the slide I just explained. I'm not going to explain it again, but it's really about the fact that the SESAR project is alive, in fact. As solutions do get mature, they move to the deployment status, and this deployment follows deployment decisions, which may be carried out either collectively or can be just a local decision. It depends on the nature of the solution. Now, the master plan holds a fair number in the deployment overview of deployment roadmaps. These deployment roadmaps give deployment scenarios for solutions which are mature or about to be mature. So we have on screen there two examples, the free route airspace, which is a rather mature solution, and the virtual center, which is a solution which is about to be mature. And in this deployment scenario, we give an overview of where the solutions should be deployed, so which type of operating environment, which stakeholder should, in fact, make change to deploy the solution. And as well, we give a view of what is the expected performance. So it can be cost efficiency, it can be environmental efficiency, it can be capacity. And we do give the dates, which are the earliest feasible dates for deployment or for the benefits that we hope to realize with these deployments. And you can find a lot more details on this than what you see in the master plan document at level 1 into the SESAR JU website, for which you have the link on the right, or into the master plan portal that you have the link as well. So we have in the master plan, in fact, quite a very important raft or number of milestones which can be offered there for the short and medium term. You see them on screen, mostly what we have for 2025 and 2030. Of course, we are going to look into these different milestones as the program evolves. But these are an indication of all the potential that we have into the master plan for the future years. We make as well a plea, which is very important, on the need to find ways to accelerate the SESAR market uptake. So what does this mean is that really, we would like to evolve from the current 30 years in times from R&D to deployment. This is what we observe traditionally in our business, in the ATM business. We would like to really make that go to a 5 to 10 years deployment. That's very important now at this moment, following the COVID crisis situation. And we would like doing this to really make sure that we work in synchronization with standardization and regulatory bodies, and that we effectively do R&D followed by a network of demonstrators to really shorten this time to market for the future R&D activities. And why do we want to do that and accelerate? I think Florian was saying that. We believe, we think that really the way to go, what we have in the master plan in terms of strategy is for the long term. This digital European sky is really the way to go. But we think that we need to accelerate to get there. And by doing so, we are convinced that we will ensure the greenest ATM, that will be the most efficient, and that will provide the most benefits to all passengers, but as well to the European business, the citizens, and the society at large. And by doing so, we think we are going to contribute to a smarter and more sustainable aviation. And on this, I think it was my last slide. So Alain, I give the floor back to you, hopefully.
Thank you, Marie-France and Hortensia. Very well done. I think we are entering the phase where we would like to really interact with you as much as possible. Thank you, and really don't feel shy to ask questions. Vote for the questions that are in the question window to your right. As I said, we will try to answer as many of them as we possibly can. Some of my colleagues are trying to answer them live. But before we take your first questions, I would like just to start another poll on your feeling about the relevancy of the vision towards a more digital and sustainable ATM. Is a more digital and sustainable ATM, in your understanding, going to help the sector grow out of the crisis? Please indicate whether you strongly disagree or all the way to the opposite, strongly agree. You have many nuances in between. I will pause in a bit just to reflect on those results. In the meantime, I will take some of the first questions that have been raised. I will start with the question from Robert about the consideration of cybersecurity in the digital European sky and the connection with higher levels of system integration, automation. Maybe on this one, I would like to throw the ball at Florian if he has some high-level remarks on the matter, and I'm happy to complement afterwards.
Thank you, Alain. Thanks for the question. I think, first of all, it's a very valid one that we are well aware of in all the activities that have been performed in SESAR. And indeed, I would say the core element of the vision and of the evolution of the ATM system are related to exchange of information and a progressive increase in terms of automation support. So if you start to connect things together and then to use this connectivity to bring in a number of automation routine and so on, inevitably, not only you increase the level of exposure to the risk, to potential attacks and so on, but as well, you increase potentially the impact that this risk might have onto the system. So I think there is no silver bullet to that. There is really some hard work that has to be performed in securing at each step the evolution of the system. I would like to highlight two elements. The first one, which is really at the technical level, when we develop solutions, whether they are from a technology standpoint or more from an operational standpoint, we make sure that they are securable, that basically we can ensure the proper resilience of those solutions in terms of attack, as well as protecting them from those attacks. That's not the purpose of a program like SESAR to define the exact technical solutions that have to be applied to this security level. This is more for the industry to come up with these elements, and this is what is actually happening. Nevertheless, we make sure that we do not create elements that cannot be secured properly in the system. So that's really at the, I would say, the micro level in terms of how the system is going to evolve with the new bricks that are coming from SESAR. I think what is extremely important, and probably even more important, is that the overall architecture of the future system is securable, so that we embed the security requirements in the top-level architecture. And I think this is what SESAR and what the modernization of ATM can bring as a new component. If you reflect on how the system is operated and built today, it is a system that has grown according to developments, legacy reasons, and so on. And we do see today that some components of the system are extremely hard to secure based on the current architecture, because it has not been constructed with those requirements embedded into it. We do see that typically on the CNS system, and I'm not going to expose to you all the difficulties we would have if we would want to get this fully secured according to the technology we are using. this is why it's extremely important to take the cybersecurity requirements upfront into the way we develop the system, into its architecture. And this is basically what we are doing in terms of how the system is being built from a resilience standpoint, from a cybersecurity requirement standpoint.
Thank you, Florian. I must say I have nothing to add, and I do hope that Robert, who asked the question, and it was very strongly supported by many, is satisfied with the answer. I would like to move on to a question from Peter. Defragmentation by virtualization. Can you explain how the two relate? I'm happy to throw that to you, Florian. If not, I'm also happy to give a go at it. It's as you prefer.
I'll just start, Alain, and then you can maybe complement with some concrete example of what we do. I think we have to be mindful of the words that we use. Virtualization, you can put everything and the rest below this this notion. And there are different ways of approaching it. I think what we are trying to do is really to progressively disconnect or have a looser connection between the physical infrastructure, the geographical layer, and the way we provide the services. Why? It's really because this brings additional possibility in terms of building and evolving the systems. This brings additional possibility as well in terms of making sure that this system becomes more resilient and less fragmented. It's really the ability to combine service provisions, which are performed today in a very traditional manner with I would say a legacy construction where basically in the past to provide ATC services, you had to be under the airspace or close to the airspace that was controlled. In an architecture where you can build combination of that. The idea is not necessarily to change everything, but with additional components where you have additional service layers that can be provided from elsewhere. This brings resilience, and this brings the ability actually to be more flexible in the way you provide capacity, and thereby to defragment the system instead of having those silos of operations that we have today with a very strong coupling between the ATC operations and the airspace structure and the geographical location of those ATC operations.
Thank you, Florian. Maybe just to complement that, to take a practical example, if we would like to move from an organization of airspace that today is essentially organized around relatively static sectors, and we would like to say that we can have a more resilient and scalable system if we would have a more dynamic utilization of that airspace. Well, we believe, based on the research and development activities that are done, that virtualization techniques for centers, but here I'm just taking the example for an en route operational scenario, can help enabling a more dynamic utilization of airspace with potentially cross-border sections, but it relies on the implementation of a new supporting architecture that enables data resources in particular to be shared better across multiple controller working positions and centers. So ultimately, it's also an answer to the single European sky to say that we can do a lot by better utilizing technology. So I do hope that this answered your question, Peter. Next question is from Louisa. Automation is often achieved through artificial intelligence, which is not easy to get certified because of the safety critical nature of its application. Do we have any activities inside SESAR dedicated to achieving this particular goal? Florian, I would like to, I'm sorry, throw that one back to you, and I'm happy to complement it. We have pointers on that in the vision also. So Hortensia, don't hesitate to complement. Florian?
Yep. Well, first of all, I think we have to be very humble in tackling this question because basically we are at the beginning of it. And I think as any time you take the first step toward a new technology or the application of a technology that actually starts to be well known in other domains to something like aviation, we have to do it in the proper way and we have to do it step by step. So the first part of my answer will be that we are there. We are at the very first step, whereby, I mean, we don't start to apply such capability to the core of the safety critical systems. There's a lot already we can do in terms of applying this type of technology to things which are really business critical, but not necessarily directly safety critical. That's the first part, and this is a way to start to understand the implications and in particular the human interaction with such systems and how we can build the security on safety layers around it. Second element is that you can try to apply this capability to, again, the core functionality that we do today, or you can try to enrich those core functionality which are safety related with an additional safety layers that will come from such application. And this is a second area where we want to focus, so that basically we do not start to inject artificial intelligence all over the place in I mean, the controller tools or in automation that you have on board of the cockpits and so on, but where basically we start to have new functionalities that come on top of it, that have the ability to detect things that human analysis will not detect or will not detect in real time. And I think this is where we can bring a lot of added value in terms of safety by applying such techniques. We start to see that, for instance, with a concrete example through the remote towers, whereby basically through the ability to compute and analyze video streams, there are objects, there are behaviors that can be detected by the machine, reported to the controller or reported to an operator to be properly interpreted. And this adds actually a level of safety to the existing one. And the last part of the answer is, I think it was stressed in the presentation, we do foresee a very strong coupling with EASA in the work we perform on such activities. And this is for this very reason. This is for the reason that certification of such systems are new things, and we need to understand with the regulator how we can approach such things. I would say it's a matter as well of a very essential competitivity element for our industry to be able, as a whole, to master this type of component in the future system.
Thank you, Florian. I'm sure that Louisa is happy with your answer. I do hope so. Next question, and I would like to maybe throw that one to you, Marie-France, and I'm happy to compliment. It's a question from Kieran on investments from airlines, in particular with regards to equipage and the regulatory approach for them, the issue of mandates or not, and somehow the importance in what Kieran is stressing of having predictability and assurance with regards to the benefits related to airspace user investments. Maybe, Marie-France, you could give a perspective from your experience as a project manager dealing with these aspects, how you are overcoming these type of discussions and addressing them as part of your activities when you're developing deployment plans for elements impacting aircraft equipage. And also the question is more specifically related to the regulatory dimension of developing deployment plans and how this is done. And I'm happy to complement.
Okay. So developing the deployment plan where we need to see about airborne equipage deployment. Of course, we do that, and that part of the slides that Alain was showing, we do develop the master plan and all these development scenarios, deployment scenario, with all partners, and we involve, of course, airspace users in discussing the possibility to be there. So we effectively get from the work, the R&D work, which is done for the solutions, we understand which type of functions, equipment needs to be deployed. And we, with all stakeholders, look into the typical deployment time that should be involved. There is as well a number of colleagues developing with partners the possible the business case for the deployment, having a cost-benefit analysis, still with involvement of all the partners, including airspace users. And through this, we get a bit more certainties on the deployment scenario that we recommend. And in the master plan, in the chapter 5, I mean, these deployment scenarios, they are outlook of, that's the art of the possible, and looking into what should be done if everything goes well. Then these deployment scenarios are taken on board at another layer of discussion to see what is feasible in terms of deployment, and they are potentially turned into regulation when we see that there is a need for a synchronized deployment. And that's what happened basically when we had the pilot common project, which decided to go and say, okay, we need to regulate this because we wanted to ascertain the moment where the deployment would be reached. Otherwise, we have a number of solutions which are for local deployments for which we need no regulation. But that's true that typically in the past we had always go through regulation to ensure a level of deployment from the airspace users, to ensure a ratio of deployment, because otherwise the benefits are not accrued. Now in future, what should be done to improve the situation? Because we are aware that it's not always ideal, because we have had cases in the past where airspace users have been asked to make deployment, and we have seen and observed that the ground was not deploying in at the same pace. So this is something that we try to improve with the common project, but on which we want to work further in future. And in fact, look into incentivization of deployment of equipage, looking into things like operational incentives, which should be supporting faster deployment. That's okay. At the level of the master plan level 1, looking into the time period where we look at, we don't in the master plan give these very firm answers on, we are bank going to put a regulation forward for this type of equipment. These are still areas for further discussion and decisions to go about deployment. That's all from me, Anna, if you want to complement. I hope it's giving an overview of what is existing in the program, what we do when we do master planning at the moment, but as well where we would like to progress in future. I mean, being more responsive into improving that.
An optimal way to deploy technologies to answer to some performance opportunities and challenges. There is a regulatory roadmap that outlines the regulatory needs, but the regulatory decision itself is in the hands of the Commission. And I would just like to emphasize that at present there is a whole process ongoing under the auspices of the Commission to review the deployment pipeline under the so-called CP1 process. And of course, these decisions that need to be taken with regulators, member states and stakeholders will have to be reflected back into the master plan, and we will have to draw conclusions. So I wouldn't like to somehow anticipate the outcome of these very delicate discussions that are dealt with as part of a dedicated process and that do take into account the current very difficult context. I am very sorry to say that we are soon running out of time, and I will not be able to throw more questions to the great speakers that we've had. But I would like to make you a promise that we will be taking any of the unanswered questions with us, and we will provide on our website answers to them. So you should get the response. Please monitor our webpage. So your questions will not be left unanswered. Last, I would also like to share the results of the poll. I'm sure that you've had an opportunity to look at it, but overall, I note that there is a wide majority of you that think that the elements that we have been discussing are really part of the solution. The vision stands. There is about 10% of skeptics that think that some elements are missing, but generally speaking, most of you either strongly agree or agree with the fact that digitalization can help our sector grow out of this crisis. I hope with that you have been convinced that we have some very interesting ingredients in this master plan to help us address the current pandemic and grow out of this crisis. I would like to invite you to follow some of the sessions that are going to be focusing on digitalization and some particular technical aspects over the days and weeks to come as part of our upcoming sessions. I would like to thank all of the speakers for having taken the time, and mostly all of you, close to 300 at times, who have spent some time to exchange with us and interact with us on this topic. Thank you very much.